Welcome to SC Dawah Live. Today we are facing a reality which we really want to try and avoid, but it is coming to fruition, which is the end of Ramadan. Ramadan's coming to an end, but we want to end with a high. We want to end with some positive learning, some positive teaching. And just before we get into what today's topic is about, hijab, how are you feeling that Ramadan's coming to an end now?
It's a good question. To be honest, I've been getting these really horrible headaches. When I fast, it's very difficult for me to fast. I don't know why, but I don't know if it's contributory to it or not, but I suffer from very severe migraines. So in a sense, I'm quite relieved. I know that's not probably the answer that you wanted to hear, maybe, but because of the pain that, some serious pain that comes along with those headaches, in that sense, alhamdulillah, that, but in another sense, obviously, you feel like, you want the month to continue so you can get more rewards.
Yeah.
And especially the night prayers and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of last year around this time in Ramadan, the first of Ramadan, when me and you were in a park in Oxford and you were just holding your head.
Remember?
Yes. And you were like,
yeah. You were gonna take care. You were gonna do that debate, wasn't it? You were gonna take my place. I said, look,
I was the plan B, but I was like, bro, you could do it. You could do it, man.
No one knew how much pain I was in that day, except for a few people.
Yeah. I do remember that. So
I've done lots of crazy things when I've been ill and sick, and it's always alhamdulillah, like, sometimes when Allah wants tawfiq to happen, Allah will make tawfiq happen, which is what happened. Alhamdulillah.
Absolutely. So everybody else, just let us know before we begin, as we're waiting for people to join. Let us know, how do you feel about Ramadan coming to an end? For one, I actually feel like time is going much more faster. It reminds me of the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where he mentioned time going faster. And this is something which I'm really feeling, and I'm maybe feeling this more perhaps because of the coronavirus and the way that things are sped up, and that, how the world just seems to be going in a very unpredictable location, right? There's a lot of uncertainty about finance, a lot of uncertainty about geopolitics. There's a lot of things going on. And at the same time, we are facing new atheism, and we are facing the rise of disbelief in God, and we're trying to mitigate that. So, Hijab, just before we get into the cosmological argument, let us take this opportunity to remind the viewers, why are we involved in engaging with new atheism? Why is it important to take on these guys? And how does that fit in terms of the dawah?
Okay, I want to break it down like this by saying new atheism in and of itself is not too much of a threat. That's my analysis. I've done extensive analysis on it. In terms of shaping public discourse and shaping public belief, I don't think new atheism is a threat on Muslim and Christian communities in terms of creating actual apostasy. And I base this what I'm saying, this statement here, on the best data that has actually been done in the Western world, which is, for example, the Yaqeen Institute. I think they're the only ones who actually brought out a full-scale, robust sociological experiment on doubt in the Muslim world. And of the different things that they asked their participants, one of them was new atheist arguments. And it wasn't actually, more people were in doubt, and great doubt of their religion, which is Islam, as a result of perceived jurisprudential and creedal intolerance within it. So in terms of new atheist arguments actually causing apostasy, there's minimum actual evidence that it causes apostasy. And from that perspective, I think the new atheist movement has largely failed to achieve what it wants to achieve. Richard Dawkins recently, in one of his interviews with The Sun, which is a videographic interview, he was asked something, I'm paraphrasing, something along the lines, he says, do you think you're winning? And he said, yes, we are winning. But in what senses are you winning? I mean, you're not really, your arguments are not causing people to be what you are. And the best evidence of this is actually Linda Woodhead. Okay, so she's done a large-scale sociological experiment, the best in the UK, probably the best data in the UK. Linda Woodhead, and it's the most current as well. And she says that only 5.5% of the UK public actually strident or confident atheists.
Yes.
So that is to say, they hold the same belief kind of system as someone like Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
But by the way, if 5.5% of people are strident atheists, that is exactly the same amount of people in the UK as there are Muslims.
Yeah.
In fact, British opinion surveys say that there are 6% Muslims in the UK. So that is, and it's growing actually, the number is growing. So we shouldn't, I think there's an assumption here that the threat is bigger than it actually is. Most people in the Western world are not confident or positive atheists. They are not. Yeah. The Pew Research information that we have, for example, the best and most recent about the United States suggests that 90%, and that is the most recent, 90% of people in the United States, they believe in a higher power, quote unquote, higher power.
Yeah.
As we said, of those people who are non-religious in the UK, only as a number of the overall demographic, 5.5% are actually strident atheists.
Yeah.
So the new atheist movement haven't even succeeded in converting, if you like, the agnostics. It's not. I think it's an exaggerated threat. People like Richard Dawkins, who's seen as the height of the atheist movement. I mean, if you do a data analysis on him, you'll find that he's actually he's go to Google Trends and put Richard Dawkins, compare him with any person, any public figure you like. He's not having an impact, that kind of impact on society that you think. He's a 78-year-old man. Okay, his book, The God Delusion, which done well, so whatever it was, 2006 when it was first published.
Yeah,
it's not doing very well right now. His newest book, Outgrowing God, is not doing very well at all comparative to The God Delusion.
Yeah.
You could say the new atheist movement is crumbling. You could say that the new atheist movement is now trying to rediscover itself, because the new atheist arguments have been destroyed from within academia. It's not, forget about the Muslim Christian intervention. I think that the new atheism has been destroyed from within academia. You know, you have philosophers like Michael Roos, you have Elliot Sober, you have so many big names in Western philosophy literally humiliating new atheism. Someone like Michael Roos, he says, I'm ashamed to be, the God delusion made me ashamed to be an atheist. I mean, this is so when you get humiliating comments like that, and when you get the academic world turning against new atheists, and when you have someone like Sam Harris, who's seen as Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, these are the two main guys that new atheists. Daniel Dennett is not, he's a non-entity. Yeah, his books are not read. He's not a charismatic person. He's just in the background. He's a shadow. He's a shadow. So he's seen as one of the four horsemen. He's still alive, talking. You know, his numbers are very small. I mean, when he debates anybody, who does he get? Who does he really? He's not getting much people interested in his style. I'm sorry to say. And who's the fourth member again? They say the fourth. Christopher Hitchens is dead. Yeah, he was the most charismatic of the four. You know, and I think he was the pulse actually of the new atheist movement. He was the one that was keeping it alive. He was the witty one. He was the charismatic one. Yeah. Now that he's gone, you've got what? Richard Dawkins, who's a 78-year-old man. Is not to say that a 7-year-old can't be charismatic, it can't be, but he's just out of touch with the youth. I'm sorry. Yeah. So the new atheist movement has crumbled. I think new atheism or atheism as a non-belief, if you want to call it that, or positive atheism, strident atheism, confident atheism. Not many people, comparative to the rest of the populace, actually believe it. Yeah. There's probably more Muslims in the UK than there are positive atheists. According to Linda Woodhead, that's what is the case.
Absolutely. So here's where I wanted to play devil's advocate and challenge you, right? So you're making these claims which sound very appealing, especially from the perspective of academia. And anybody can verify from a purely academic perspective, they're out of line. But in terms of the numbers and the statistics, do you have any data have you done any research on this? I think this is a good question, and this is something we were discussing a few weeks ago. So I'd like you to sort of tell the viewers, where is this information coming from that you're speaking about now?
So if you look at, like I said to you before, Linda Woodhead has probably got the best information from a demographic perspective in the UK context. Yeah, she says only 5.5% of people are strident atheists. You've got something called British attitude surveys. Okay, so British attitude surveys, you'll see once again how many people are Muslim, how many people are Christian, Jewish, atheists, and so on.
Yeah.
You'll find, for example, Pew Research. Pew Research is the gold standard of research, and you'll find that according to them, 90% of the American public, even those who are non-religious, believe in a higher power. Okay, just because people don't believe in the biblical God, or a triune God, or Jesus as God, or those things, it doesn't mean that they don't believe in God. It doesn't mean that they're atheists. 90% is a massive number, and that's something that ought to be accounted for. So the question of, okay, is atheism now? Atheism, really, new atheists, some people who argue for that position, they don't have anything to argue against. They have to be deconstructionists as much as they can, but they don't have anything to offer. And most people see through that, and most people intuitively believe in God, as we know from Justin Barrett's and his research in Oxford and so on. So this, I think we can't make a monster out of it, because at the end of the day, it is what it is. These people who are new atheists, strident atheists, for the most part, they're a small part, just as much as we are. They're a small minority group of people that maybe many of which have experiences which made them hate religion, and many of them hate God, hate the idea of God, maybe for psychological reasons. I would say that potentially there should be some surveying and some studying on the strident atheists, the confident ones, the positive ones. Why are they the way they are? And a lot of the time, I propose and hypothesize that it will be for psychological reasons, why they actually come to their conclusions. But that's something that needs to be done in a formal sociological setting for it to be robust.
Absolutely. And Jazakallah khair for that. I also wanted you to elaborate a little bit about, when we were speaking a few weeks ago about some of the statistical studies that you've been involved in, which have been novel, which have not been done before, which involved science and religion, and the fact that it wasn't actually science in of itself that led to the decline of religion. And the reason why I wanted you to highlight this is because this doesn't actually exist anywhere. This was very novel research based upon social media algorithms and whatnot.
Yeah. So the idea that the arguments, because if you look at new atheist arguments, for the most part, look at the books of Richard Dawkins, and look at the books of Daniel Dennett, look at the books of Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris. All four have one thing in common. All four of those works, they all refer to kind of science as undermining. A.C. Grayling as well, he's very, very vehement on these points. I think I'm quite surprised by Grayling's stance, to be honest, because he's meant to be a philosopher. But anyway, these individuals here, they're all very confident in the fact, they're all very confident in the fact that science undermines God. And they go very, I mean, you'd be very surprised. People don't know what the entailment of their belief is. They believe, right, that, they believe, so Richard Dawkins' main argument actually is that the theory of theory of evolution, okay, makes positing and watchmaker type entity to prove the existence of design as a superfluous addition. There's no requirement for that. But the point is this: is that he is confusing, and this is one of the biggest fallacies of the new atheist movements that's been exposed by so many, like Pigliucci. How do you pronounce his name? Pigliucci, is it?
Yeah, Pigliucci,
Pigliucci,
Massimo Pigliucci.
Foba, by Bruce, by all of these people, philosophers. He's confusing methodological naturalism with metaphysical naturalism. So he thinks because we can explain the theory of evolution without reference to God, therefore God therefore believing in God is excessive or superfluous or is non-justified.
Yeah.
And that's a weak argument, because
Yeah.
that's a conflation, as Pigliucci and as Sober and as many others, Roos, have all said. You're conflating between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism. So
Yeah. And the
yeah.
funny way that Sober explains that, right? And he uses the example that you can explain the existence, you can explain the mechanisms of gold melting at a certain temperature without postulating dinosaurs. But just by that explanation, you haven't disproven dinosaurs. So he's basically saying that, look, there's no link, right? There's no link between it's necessarily true that methodological naturalism leads to philosophical naturalism, and you basically need to make an argument for that, and they don't actually do that. Now, I just wanted to highlight here this issue that you raised, that philosophers have refuted new atheists for. This isn't a small mistake. This is a childish mistake, and hence why people like Roos say that Dawkins would fail an introductory class in philosophy, let alone an advanced class.
Absolutely, he would fail, and he said this himself in one of his debates with Archbishop Rowan Williams. He says it will be known that I'm not a philosopher. You can see his own self-insecurity when it comes to philosophy, which is why he never accepted any debate with a fully fledged philosopher. Look at William Lane Craig. He challenged him to debate, and he ran away from that debate. William Lane Craig had an empty seat for him on Oxford University, and he didn't want to come and sit down and debate William Lane because he would lose. And William Lane Craig would break him open with philosophy, with the Islamic contingency, Kalam arguments that he's taken from our tradition.
Let's home in on that. So let's begin now. We've got enough people watching now, mashallah. So during the debate, and I just want to set this sort of background. During the debate, the main argument was actually that you were putting forward was for the argument for God's existence. And then from that contingency argument, obviously making the case for Islam. And after the debate, and I want everybody to refocus here on what is the most important thing. After the debate, in fact, after about a year, Cosmic came back, and then there was questions about this and that, issues which were not actually to do with this main argument. So today's live session is about going back to this particular argument. The reason being is because fundamentally, the strongest argument on the day that was made and was not addressed, that was made by you and Abdullah Andalusi, was the contingency argument. And the thing about the contingency argument is it's an ancient argument. It can be a little bit complicated sometimes. It can be simplified as well. But because of that, a lot of people, if they see two people arguing about an argument and they don't fully understand the argument, they may think perhaps both people have good points. But in reality, the argument itself is so powerful, and it's not really had a response. And even during the debate, there was actually no real response to it. But what we want to do today is we want to deal with the argument and really strip it down to its bare minimum, look into what it is, and then see if anybody wants to challenge it even online right now and have a discussion. So why don't you outline the framework of the argument?
Before I outline the framework of the argument, I think it's important for me to tell the people what the argument does not achieve. Okay, which I know it sounds like a bit of the argument does not achieve a conclusion, which means that we have all of the attributes of Allah as detailed in the Quran, or all of the attributes of God detailed in any scripture, because there's so many attributes in the Quran about Allah. He's Ar-Rahman, He's Ar-Rahim, He's Al-Ghafur, Al-Afu. He's the most gracious, the most merciful. He's, the pardoning one, the Al-Qawi, the strong. There are things you can kind of infer logically, and things which you cannot. So we're putting that on the table. The purpose of the argument, so we said the limitation of the argument, it doesn't give you all of the attributes of God according to the Islamic belief system. That's number one. That's the limitation of the argument. Number two is, or any religious belief system except for deism, I would say. Number two, I would say, is that the argument itself is so the argument itself can be believed by someone who's a non-Muslim, someone who's a deist, or it's not specific to Islam.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not specific to Islam. Number three, and this is a very important, what is the purpose of it? The purpose of the argument is not to make someone into a Muslim, okay, in the fully fledged sense of the word. So the purpose of the argument is to bring someone out of atheism, okay. So there's a difference between, okay, because it's an incremental process. We're trying to give da'wah. Yeah, we're not going to say to an atheist, become Muslim and that's it, and it becomes Qul la ilaha illallah, he says la ilaha illallah. It doesn't work like that. So you have to go through a process. The purpose of the argument is to take them from 0 to 1. Okay, if you get to 1 now, then we can start adding flesh to the bone. We can start giving you more arguments after you've understood and accepted this one for other aspects of Islam. Yeah, for example, the Quran being the word of God, the Prophet being the Prophet Muhammad. So it should not be believed that, okay, this argument now, it makes you a Muslim. It doesn't make you into a Muslim. It just brings you out of atheism. Okay, so these are the 3 things I wanted to put as a caveat or like a preamble. Now, the argument itself is quite straightforward. Okay, there are 3 types of existences. There is impossible existences, there is possible existences, and there are necessary existences. Yeah. So an impossible existence is something which cannot be in the real world, something like a squared circle. This is impossible. So the ruling on that is that an impossible existence cannot be. It doesn't exist. A squared circle doesn't exist. I think everyone will agree. Now, a possible existence, okay, has the following characteristics, okay? And I want to mention 3. This is the definition of a possible existence. It's not just one definition, but 3 definitions, and all of them must be respected for us to continue. Number 1, that it's dependent. So the thing in question relies on something else in order for it to exist. It doesn't rely on itself, but it relies on something else in order for it to exist. So number 1, we said dependent. Number 2 is it could have been some other way. So it could have been some other way. Now, I know that there are deterministic people that will say, or determinists that will say, well, actually, it couldn't have been any other way, which I think there was something that was lost in translation. Let me be very specific at what I mean by it could have been any other way. It could be any other way, very careful here, if you exclude its dependence of the necessary being. Okay, that's very important. And number 3, okay, if you take it out of existence, absurdities don't happen. In other words, existence does not depend on it. So for example, 28 years ago, I didn't exist. So if, let's say 29 years ago, yeah, I wasn't here, but the whole of existence was still here, which means my existence is not required for all of existence to exist. So the possible existence has 3 main definitions. To summarize, it's dependent, it's reliant on something else. It depends, it's dependent, it's reliant on something else, number 1. Number 2, it could have been any other way if considered alone in isolation, not in conjunction with either a necessary being or anything else which is meant to be a substitute for it, like a causal chain or a necessary or an inferent. So if taken in isolation, then it could have been any other way. So as a determinist, why are you a determinist, for example? You're a determinist because you believe there's a causal chain which has caused everything to be the way it is. Yeah. However, if you delete the causal chain and you have just this thing in isolation, then what I'm saying is this thing could be in any other way. Yes? So there's no requirement for it to be the necessary existence. The necessary existence now. What is the necessary existence? So we said the impossible existence is like a squared circle, something which cannot exist in the real world.
Yeah.
A possible existence are these 3 things. We said dependent, could be any other way. And number 3 is what? We said is dependent, it could be any other way. What did we say the 3rd thing was?
That on its own, it
could be any other way on its own.
Its own, yeah.
Yeah, but what's the 3rd thing that we said?
That is dependent.
No, we said that already. Dependent could be any other way. I'm not testing you, by the way. What did we say? Let's see if some of the viewers have remembered. Come on, can one of the viewers put in one of you just to see if we're all following?
And help out our fasting brains, because while you were talking, I was also checking
the third one. Come on, guys, there must be one person who can tell me. This is meant to be an interactive session, right? So there must be someone who's heard what I said. Can someone just remind me of the third definition? Can you put their comment through? So no one's paying attention. That seems like no one, seems like no one's paying attention. Okay, we said, oh, this is important. Okay, so let's start again. Number one is dependent, which means it's reliant, on something else.
Yep.
Number two, it could be any other way by itself, in isolation, so not considering any causal chain or any necessary existence.
The existence
and number three,
on something depends on something else which is dependent.
No, we said this already, right? Okay. But there's the third bit is its non-existence. If you take it out of creation or the world will continue. So the existence doesn't depend on it. Right. Existence of a category does not depend on this thing. Right. So for example, 28 years ago, I wasn't, maybe 29 years ago, I wasn't alive.
Yeah.
So, but the world was still there. There was still such a thing as existence.
Yeah.
So Muhammad hijab is not required in order to make existence exist. Does that make sense? So if you take me out of existence, the world is still here. If you put me into existence, the world is still here. Existence doesn't depend on me.
Yeah.
Are you with me? Existence doesn't depend on me. No absurdity happens if you take me out of existence.
Yeah.
So these are the three definitions. Etch them somewhere, remember them. These are the three definitions of a possible existence. Now, once you know that, then the argument is a one-sentence argument. Okay. It's a one-sentence argument.
So let me just, right. The way you've done it there is there's no other possible categories.
There's only one more possible category, which is the necessary existence, right? So we said impossible, we said possible, and we said necessary. Right. So when I talk about the necessary existence, I'm talking about the following thing which we're going to arrive at. So here's my postulation. There cannot be a world of only possible existences. Okay? There cannot be a world of only possible existences. Wherever it is, there cannot be a world where there is only possible existence. Why? I've said this 3 times now. When we define possible existences, we said something which is reliant on something else, something which if you take out of existence would still be there, and something which could be any other way, not in reference to the necessary existence or a causal chain of some sort. No, in reference only to itself.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, if how we understand that there cannot be a world of only possible existences, that's basically it. The argument, therefore, is there must be a necessary existence. What's a necessary existence? Something which all possible existences depends upon, and it depends upon nothing.
Yep.
If you don't have this, you will not have existence. For example, I'll give you an analogy. And analogies are not perfect, but it helps sketch a mental image as to what we're talking about. If I go to the sea and I look at the sea, then I will be justified in thinking that there is a sea floor, even if I've never experienced or seen such sea floor. Which means, how do I know that? Because I know that water cannot just continually balance upon itself and hold itself up without there being a foundational thing which literally holds it up and maintains it and sustains it. Now, this is the closest kind of analogy I can bring to you to make you understand how it's important to realize that there needs to be a foundation of reality, a necessary existence through which and by which everything else can exist. Which means the necessary existence must be what? It must be always the case, which means eternality. There's never a time where the necessary existence is not an existence. Because if there's ever a time where necessary existence is not an existence, then there could not be any existence. So it must be post-eternal and pre-eternal.
Yeah.
It must be uncaused. Now, someone might not believe in causation, but whether you believe it or not, it has to be uncaused. Why? Because if it was caused, then what is it caused by? Whatever it's caused by explains it.
Yeah.
But this thing is meant to be the ultimate explanation for everything else. So it has to be uncaused, and therefore must be self-sufficient in the sense that everything depends upon it and it depends upon nothing. Otherwise, it would be a possible existence. So this is, when we say the necessary existence, we are referring to, in Islamic terminology, what's referred to as a samad, that everything, كل الأشياء تصمد إليه, everything goes back to it, this samad, this eternal and self-sufficient entity, and it relies upon nothing itself. That's exactly the definition of what a samad in the Quran is, in the basic definition of God. This is the basic argument.
Yeah. And as a argument, you've obviously explained it in a bit more of detail, but you can actually simplify it in very simple terms, which is essentially the idea that either things are dependent or they are independent, and you
Absolutely.
cannot have an infinite regress of dependent things. Therefore, there must
Perfect.
be one thing which is independent. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because many years ago, I saw a talk of Abdullah Andalusi, in which he basically had to summarize the contingency argument in literally 2 minutes, and he did it in a similar way to this, right? So
Yes.
the reason why I'm guessing you put it in this formal way is because when you're dealing with very advanced atheists who are skeptical, who are trying to maneuver around the argument, you're just covering all the bases from the beginning. But essentially, it is also a very simple argument which can actually be used. Now, I want to ask you a question about this. So when you use this in the debate, what was the reply? What was the reply from the other side to this argument?
So Colin Brewer had the only, from what I remember, only antagonizing reply, which was, so what created God? Yeah, this is what I remember.
So you never understood the argument, basically.
So, but because then, but what created God would suggest that he's caused, or but then the whole argument in its form would suggest that the necessary being is not caused, right? So
Yeah.
I think he didn't understand the argument.
Yeah.
One of the things that was said about the P and Q. So what I was understanding that Alex put this thing forward. He says, if P entails Q and P is necessary, therefore Q is necessary. That's what he said, yeah? So what I was understanding was that he was saying, if P is the necessary existence and it entails Q, which is another thing, yeah? So therefore, and P entails Q, therefore P must mean Q, which means that Q must also be a necessary existence, which is a formal objection to the contingency argument called bootstrapping. It's been referred to in many books. Rasmussen has tackled it and showed that that's not why it's not the case. He's dealt with it in his book, The Necessary Existence. But this is my understanding. I thought what he was saying was that. But actually, he was making a mundane point. He was making a mute point. In a sense, he was making a point which I agreed with, which is if P is the necessary existence and it entails Q, then Q must exist in necessity. So in other words, what he's trying to, because I think there has been a confusion of the whole argument from, because when I defined a possible existence, right? He said a possible existence. Yes. What is a possible existence? A possible existence, I said, something that couldn't be any other way. That's one of 3 definitions, right? I couldn't tell him it also means this, it also means just time constraint. Possible existence could have been any other way. He said, no, I don't believe it could have been any other way. Why? Because of the causal chain that allowed it to be, because you're a determinist. Okay, fine, I get that. Let's agree with you. We don't disagree with this point that if P is true and it's necessary, that entails Q, which means that Q is also necessary, meaning that it is necessary because of P.
Yeah.
But lawla P, I don't know why I said that in Arabic. If it wasn't for P, if it wasn't for P, then it wouldn't have been Q. And that's why this is exactly what the mutakallimun have mentioned, which is the fact that they differentiate with something called muftaqirun li nafsihi. مفتقر إلى نفسي, not مفتقر إلى نفسي, sorry, that's incorrect terminology. They use the term, what do you call it? They're basically either dependent or independent.
Yeah.
So if it's muftaqirun ila ghayrihi, then it's Q, right? But if it's Q, if you're saying Q is necessary because P is necessary, now what's P? You're saying is that because in the post-debate discussion, he said, I define necessity as a causal chain. But if you define necessity as a causal chain, first of all, is this causal chain finite or infinite? Then we have the question of infinite regress. It's not a problem if you want to go down that route. That's a different question. But the point is, if P is necessary, therefore Q, and you're saying P is necessary, meaning it has to be the case, and therefore whatever comes from it also has to be the case. That's different to saying it's the necessary existence. Because if you said it's the necessary existence, okay, saying it's the necessary existence, if P is the necessary existence, therefore Q must be the necessary existence, then this is a tautology. It's like saying, I am Muhammad, yeah? Muhammad is a man, therefore he's a human.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a truism. It's true.
So it's a truism. So if it was, so this is a conditional statement that I was seeing as a conditional thing between P and Q, that he was differentiating between P and Q, and in fact it's T. It's a tautology. It's the same thing that you're referring to. So if you say Muhammad X, or so if you say, let's say, I don't know, give me an animal, a dog, yeah? If I say that Bernie is an Alsatian, yeah, Bernie is an Alsatian, or Jenny is a German, Bernie is a German Shepherd, therefore Bernie is a dog.
Yeah.
Really and truly, there's no difference between that entails that Bernie is a dog. There's no difference between Bernie being an Alsatian and Bernie being a dog. He's the same Bernie.
Yep.
There's no T. So from that angle, P and Q are the same if you're thinking that, oh, there has to be another necessary existence. Because the moment, and this is, the arguments are actually used, the moment we differentiate P from Q in the formal sense that, okay, P is different from Q, is the moment, yeah, we're talking about the same thing when it comes to the necessary existence, and it becomes T. So that's where there was a difference of opinion, and maybe something got lost in translation. But I don't really care about the discussion. That's the only thing that was held at the argument. Apart from that, there was nothing held at the argument.
I mean, for me, that's a bit of a semantic evasion. If you define necessary as a chain of causes, right? But conceptually, what you're saying, I don't see how that's addressed by that.
No, but it can't be. Sorry, do you mind if I just come back at that? A necessary existence cannot be a chain of causation.
Yeah,
it cannot be. That's refuted in the literature. Like, for example, Ibn Sina refutes this completely. Yeah, and everybody who's spoken about the necessary existence has refuted that.
Yeah.
So the reason, in fact, that's the reason why it cannot be a chain, a causal chain. Because if you have a causal chain, okay, now is this causal chain made up of parts that are susceptible to dissembly or not? Like, for example, yeah, this is like beads, yeah. Let's consider these beads as a chain. Yeah, are you with me?
Yeah. Chain.
Now, the thing is, can I break these beads into little bits? Can I smash this now? Can I rip it up? I can.
Physically, you can, yeah.
I can rip it up, and if I rip it up, what's going to happen?
It's just it's unconnected, yeah.
Let's call this A. Let's call this A. Yeah, A. This is A. Yeah. Now A, this has got 100 beads. It's literally got 100 beads. That's exactly how much it has. Okay. Now, A is defined as 100 beads. Are you with me? A is defined as 100 beads. If I break up A into 100 little beads and I take one bead out, then this A no longer is A. A is defined as 100 beads. Now, if I take one of these beads off this thing, that's not A anymore. Are you with me?
Yeah.
This is not A anymore. If I take one of these beads off, I no longer have A.
Yeah.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
So A is the sum of its constituent parts. And when we say parts, we are talking about those things which can be broken off from something else that are susceptible to dissembly.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. So if that is the case now, if this can be broken up into different little bits, yeah, that means to say that anything that is made up of parts which are susceptible to dissembly is generated. Yeah. And anything which is generated
is not necessary.
Is not necessary.
Yeah.
is not necessary. Therefore, so a causal chain.
Yeah.
Now, there's only one possible. Let me just. I'm sorry to babble on about this a bit.
Yeah.
But there's only one possible makhraj or exit point for someone in this contentious point. Someone can say, well, the chain, instead of having 100 beads, okay, it has an infinite amount of beads.
Right.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
If someone says the chain has not 100 beads, but an infinite amount of beads, then they will say, then no problem. It's the infinite series, okay, is the necessary existence. Is the necessary existence.
Yeah.
But the question is, can such, sorry, I'm just getting a phone call, I'm just going to blank it. Is this chain with an infinite amount of beads, even if we grant the premise that infinity can exist in the real world, which I don't want, by the way, but I want to have an undercutting argument because I don't want to waste my time. Okay, infinity does exist and doesn't exist and couldn't exist. That's aside the point for me. The point is, if this chain had an infinite amount of beads, and you're saying it is the necessary existence. So wait a minute, there's two things you need to know here. If it's the necessary existence, then you agree with me then that there is a necessary existence. So okay, then we've passed the hurdle that
they've conceded.
There's only a world of possible existences.
Yeah. No, okay, fine.
Okay, so that's fine. So if you're saying it's a chain of an infinite amount of beads, then you're saying that there's a necessary existence, which is one chain, which explains all other things, but it has an infinite amount of beads. Now, problem is this: can I take and subtract from that chain? If I can take and subtract from then it's once again susceptible to dissembly. And if we say it's susceptible to dissembly, it can be broken down into pieces. If we say it can be broken down into pieces, the problem arises again.
Yes.
Because the chain wouldn't. So if I take out, if it's an infinite amount of things, and I take one out, the chain loses its characteristic as being chain A.
Yeah.
If I put something into it, then it loses characteristics as being chain A.
Yeah.
So the point is, so long as it can be taken away from and put things into it, then it no longer becomes an infinite chain. But even if we grant you that it's an infinite chain, you still have to concede to the premise that there's a necessary existence with an infinite X amount. So basically, in logic, there's no way of escaping the need for a necessary existence.
Yeah, and you could also.
And that's why I think it's an uncrackable point.
Yeah, just to add to that point, you could also argue, if we have the infinite chain and we take one off the chain, and then we take off two from the chain, is it still infinite? I mean, we could just refute it easily as well with the idea that how can an infinite a chain of causes exist in the real world? So we've had a guest join us, Ravi G. How are you doing, Ravi?
I'm fine. How about you?
I'm good. Sorry, I've got a bit of hay fever. So, Ravi, thank you for joining us on SC Dawah Live. We just covered the contingency argument for anybody who just joined us. And now we're going to start taking questions from the audience. We're going to try and limit it to a few minutes each, because we have a few people who are interested in speaking. So please let us know your question.
I'd like to ask Mohammed Hijab. Is this theory a part of the whole framework of cosmology within Islam, or is this a creation of your own?
Good question.
Definitely not a creation of my own. So, the one who initially kind of made this argument was Ibn Sina in the most formal way. So I've got a book called Kalam, Cosmological Arguments, which kind of outlines that. Then it was picked up upon by the Ash'ari tradition within Islam, most notably Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. So obviously Ghazali, he does speak about this, but he prefers a kind of cosmological argument. And then Ibn Taymiyyah, who represents the Athari school of thought, he has a long discussion about it in a book called Sharh wa Aqidat al-Isfahaniyya. So this book, so anyway, and he also he prefers a cosmological argument. This is his position. And in fact, I'm going to be releasing something on SoundCloud maybe today about Ibn Taymiyyah's position on this. It's maybe for those who are really interested in it, but it was a point of research for me as well. So,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for joining us. Anybody who has a particular question about the form of the argument itself and to try and clarify the issues in regards to it, we just had someone join us and then they were removed. Could the admin just add them back again, please? Hijab, you know this argument. What is if somebody was absolutely certain that they did not want to believe in God, could they not also just simply accept that, yes, there is a necessary being, it's just not God, it's just something, right? We just don't understand what it is.
yes, they could say that, but they'd be effectively, the thing is, how do you define God, right? So if you say there's a higher power out there, but I'm not going to call it God, that's fine. You can call it whatever you want to call it. That's now become a semantic point. But now you've given the attributes which would necessarily, or which would conventionally be given to what we call as God, to something else which you're saying is not. So that's more a semantic point. So if you say I believe in a higher power that brought everything into existence, I'm not saying that this argument leads to a higher power, but generally, like in the Pew Researchers, what people say, we believe in a higher power. Really, this might not be a biblical God for all intents and purposes, but it's definitely not an atheistic belief. So it takes you out of atheism.
Makes sense. Thank you very much for that. So Naeem has joined us. Assalamu alaikum, Naeem. How are you doing?
Walaikum salam. I'm good. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you fine. What's your question?
Okay, cool. So basically, I think the argument is quite solid, but I think I just want to cover one crack. It's basically that premise that you can't have a universe where everything is a possible existence, basically. So coming back to that chain analogy, why is it not possible to have a full, like a big cycle of everything depending on something else? So, yeah.
So imagine if you have, just for the sake of brevity and explanation, if you have 100 dominoes, yeah, and all of them are like being knocked down. There's one domino being knocked down, and they're all falling upon each other like this. Yeah, are you with me? If you have let's say you've got 5 dominoes, 4, because my finger. Okay, so look, they're all falling upon each other. Yeah. Now let's say in this analogy, existence is analogous to the dominoes. Yeah. So existence would not hold itself up with only things depending upon things which are themselves dependent. Just like the dominoes would not hold themselves up. What is required is some kind of wall or something to stop the dominoes from falling. In the same analogy, in the same way as like when we were looking at the sea, we look at the sea and we think, oh, there's a sea floor, but we have not seen the sea floor, but we say there must be a sea floor, because if there wasn't a sea floor, the water, what's holding it up, right? That's our experience of H2O in this world, in this gravitational spherical Earth. So we say, okay, look, the Earth, the water is holding it up is a sea floor. So for that reason, there's a foundation that holds it up. And we're saying there's a foundation that holds up all of creation, and that is the necessary existence. So there can't be a world of just things that depend upon other things ad infinitum. That would lead to an absurdity, and nothing would exist. There needs to be something which everything else depends upon, and it depends upon nothing. You see the point here?
Yeah. Just to play devil's advocate, let's just suppose there's a finite number of things in existence, and they're the things that all depend on each other. So it's not, in a way, it's not ad infinitum, but let's say you have 100 things and they all depend on each other in a cycle.
Yeah. So imagine if you have a phone and maybe you're calling with your phone now. What's the charge of your phone now? Is it on like 20%, 30%?
It's actually 20%.
See, look, I know about this thing, brother. I mean, so say it's 20%. So if it just depends on itself and you leave it without charge, what's going to happen? It's going to run out of charge. Yeah. So likewise, if you have things which are dependent, which depend upon other things which are dependent, then it's just going to die. It can't hold itself up. Creation cannot be. Existence wouldn't exist, basically.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, yeah, that's good. Cool, thank you. I think it would be better if the atheist, because obviously an atheist will think of a counter argument much faster than me. So yeah, I think we should leave
No,
it to the non-Muslims now.
there's nothing like that. Most atheists are not atheists because of these kinds of arguments. Most atheists are atheists maybe what we don't know. Strident atheists, why they are atheists. Maybe it's because of a childhood encounter. Maybe it's because their father abused them when they were younger. Maybe it was because their mother hurt them when they were older. I don't know what the situation is. I mean, atheists, we shouldn't assume that their reasons for being atheists are actually intellectual per se.
Yeah, but I actually used to be an atheist, and when I would hear these arguments, I'd sort of, as everyone does, they try to justify the beliefs in their head. So, I'm interested in what the atheist, actually has to say to that. Because for me, as a believer, it's like, oh, that just makes perfect sense.
Well, I think it would, because, I mean, the thing is, putting religion to the side or non-religion, this has been robust, and it's been robust throughout thousands of years. People have made this argument from the time of Aristotle, right? 323 BC, he died. This is before Jesus Christ. This argument was around before Jesus, okay? Yeah. Or arguments like it. And then it was refined by Avicenna, who died, I think, 529 or something. But so we're talking about long-standing traditions. All of the people are saying that Leibniz made a very similar argument, you see. So it's not going to be easy to crack this argument. It's not going to be easy to crack, not because, oh, I'm making it and I'm the clever one. I'm just narrating to you something which people have been saying for thousands of years and not been able to find any solutions for. And so when I say, look, when I present this argument to atheists in debates, there's two things we have. Either they confuse it with the cosmological argument, which is what happened with Edward Tabash, where he started speaking about causation, which has nothing to do with it.
Didn't that also happen with cosmic, if I recall?
No, he didn't answer the argument. He did not have any content. Look, Cosmic Skeptic did not have anything to say about this argument at all, whether in the debate and or after debate. He did not have anything to say about the Quranic challenge of inimitability and preservation. He just made moral arguments. The main focal point was morality.
Yep. So since we are waiting for a few more people to ask questions, I'm going to ask a question myself. So I had Cosmic on live a few days ago on Darwinian Delusions, and I wanted to speak about moral nihilism, right? And a good thing that came out of the conversation is something that in the debate couldn't really be fleshed out, was that he was trying to obviously argue he's not a moral nihilist, and you obviously were arguing that an atheist has to be a moral nihilist, which is the same position that I held when I debated him in Oxford. So we were disagreeing. Obviously, he was still trying to maintain moral nihilism while being an atheist. And I put something to him, and he agreed to it. And I think it's a very good thing that he agreed to it, which is I said, well, whether you think an atheist doesn't have to be a moral nihilist, that's different, because I'm arguing an atheist has to be a moral nihilist, so are you, Hijab. However, one thing he did concede to, which I thought was quite interesting, I said to him, you do recognize that if moral nihilism is true, then that has severe implications, right? That has severe implications. And I think that's an important point to take away, because, sometimes, Hijab, when we make these arguments, we forget that we're not using arguments that we just came up with. We just threw out there. These are arguments which we've either co-opted existing arguments, we've sort of amplified them in certain ways, but they're usually arguments that are tried and tested in academia, right? So one of the things which I put to him was that I gave him a new Plato's dilemma about moral nihilism based on Alex Rosenberg's work. And that basically that book, it basically argues, if you're an atheist, you absolutely have to be a moral nihilist. And this isn't coming from a Christian, this is coming from an atheist. And it's coming from an atheist who promotes atheism. But he's arguing, look, atheists need to come to terms with the fact that atheism leads to moral nihilism. Now, how is this linked to your conversation with Naeem right now? Is linked in the following way. We often argue with atheists about rationality and truth, right? What is rational and what is true? However, if moral nihilism is true, then even truth itself is undermined, because someone can say, I want to follow falsehood instead of following truth. we're going to tell them that's not a good thing to do because it's good to follow the truth. So even following truth is a good thing. And why this is important is you said in the debate that cosmics counter arguments were mostly moral. If moral nihilism is true, if atheism is true, then moral nihilism is true, even rationality and these discussions about contingency argument are completely superfluous, because truth itself does not have any intrinsic value. We don't have to follow truth. We could follow falsehood.
I mean, the biggest mistake is that, I mean, for all the people I've debated, he's just one of the only ones. I think he's actually the only one I've debated. I've had 7 formal debates. He's the only one who kept shifting his opinion, and he's the only one who kept claiming that I'm misrepresenting his views. The only one. And the problem with debating a youngster is that because they're still defining themselves. You've got to wait for them. And this is, I mean, I'm a youngster myself, but someone who's that young, who hasn't finished their degree even. I think wait for, and the lesson I've learned from this is, you know, don't debate youngsters. Don't debate people who are still formulating opinions, who haven't even, you know, matured yet, and so on. But because at the end of the day, when you got them, when you say you said this and you said that, oh, I said this 3 years ago, I said this to you, it becomes boring for everybody. I mean, at the end of the day, you're a young guy or whoever. It doesn't matter what you said. You know, with all due respect, you're not an authority. So it doesn't matter what you said. And so I think we should focus more on the arguments. And this is what I want to do in this show. I want to think about the contingency argument, because what's been lost in translation, all of this he said and she said and all of these things are the actual arguments. We're giving people an opportunity to respond to well-established academic arguments that have been around for millennia in different traditions, Eastern and Western, and we're giving you an opportunity to respond to them. You know, so this is where it's at. If we're going to kind of divert from this and make this about personal grudge and ego and this and I said and you said and I changed my opinion, and with all due respect, you're not a scholar for your opinion to count in order for the change of it to be meaningful to me. And even if you were, I wouldn't care, to be honest. I mean, even Richard Dawkins, he must have changed opinions, but at least because of his age, he's been saying the same thing for 5 or 10 years. We can take him a little bit more seriously. If someone has been saying, I mean, now the policy I've devised in my mind is that I won't debate anyone unless they've been saying the same thing for at least 5 years. So they don't say, I've changed my opinion, I've changed my opinion, I've changed my opinion, or I don't say this, I don't mean that. And this is just becoming ridiculous. So therefore, let's deal with the arguments. Is there anybody else who now? Yes.
We've just had another person joining us. His name is Maxim. How are you doing, Maxim?
I'm good, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. You sound Russian.
Sorry?
You sound Russian.
Yes, how do you know?
Well, you got an accent from those 1980s blockbusters, bro. So quite easy. So what's your question, Maxim?
My question to brother Mohammed Hijab about his argument. I don't understand when we speak about dependency, like we trace every creation to Allah. Everything depends to Allah. And keeping in mind law of energy conservation. I don't know how to fix it. Yani, if we say that sun depend on we depend on sun physically, in physical sense. We depend on sun. How do we trace the chain to Allah when sun depends to something else material? Something else material depends on another material thing. Law of energy conservation. Energy not go to anywhere else. It's like sorry for my English if you understood the question.
Yeah, I think I get where you're coming from. Okay, that energy cannot be created or destroyed, right?
Yes.
But if energy cannot be created or destroyed within a closed system, so within a closed system, that closed system itself must be dependent on something. So the idea is that in what context is energy not created or destroyed? It's not created or destroyed within a system. The system itself, where did that system come from? Or what is it dependent on? So you still go back to something, and we cannot have an infinite regress of dependent things. And if we do, and that becomes a necessary existence, then we have a necessary existence. So it's a lose-lose situation for someone. But the point is simply that just because energy supposedly cannot be created or destroyed within the closed system, it does not mean that the system itself is not dependent on something else.
So how do we come to conclusion that it is depend on another system, yani on something that is not dependent?
Yeah.
How do we trace this?
So we say, for example, you have the plant requires the sun. The sun is part of some kind of Milky Way. The Milky Way is part of the universe. Now the universe, where is it? It must be dependent on something else. Yes, because the reason why the universe must be dependent on something else, either it is dependent or independent. Like Suboor said, either the universe it is dependent, which means it needs something else to exist, or it is independent, which means it does not need anything else to exist. You see? So if it is dependent and it needs something else to exist, then that thing that it is dependent on, either it's dependent or independent, and we go backwards. So we need an independent thing to start everything up. If you say, no, the universe is independent in and of itself, then khalas, you have already the independent thing. However, the problem is the universe is made up of breakable parts. So things that can be broken out of and put into the universe. That the universe you can take something out of it and you can put something into the universe. The universe is getting bigger, this and that. So you can put something into the universe and take something out. It's made up of things. Yep. Because it's made up of things, it is just like the chain now. We go back, the universe is like this. So if this is the universe, and all of these are the things which are in the universe, then all of these things are parts of the universe which you can take out of it. And if you can take out of the universe, then it changes. The universe will change. It will not be the universe anymore. Okay, it will be something else.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Hijab. And we're going to take a question from OG, and we've had another question from Hassan after this. So welcome, OG.
Hello. Hi there.
How are you doing?
Hi.
Good. So I just have 2 quick questions.
Sure.
Where can we find in the Quran and Sunnah the use of philosophy, like in terms of dawah to people? And secondly, are you an Ash'ari?
Okay, thank you for your questions. So let's keep it on track and on topic. I mean, what I am personally shouldn't matter, but I will tell you where in the Quran and Sunnah where we find these things. So if you look at Surah Al-An'am in chapter number 6, I think around verses maybe 70 onwards, you will find that Ibrahim alayhi salam is having a conversation, and in this conversation he is speaking to his home, and he says, there is a star, and he says, هذا ربي فلما أفل قال إني لا أحب الآفلين. When it went and set, he said, I don't like the afilin, things that set. فلما رأى القمر بازغا قال هذا ربي. When he saw the moon in its glory, he said, هذا ربي. He said, this is my Lord. And then he said, and when it sets and so on. So then he says, فلما رأى الشمس بازغة قال هذا رب. When he saw the sun, he said, this is my. And at the end of it, Allah says, وحاجه قومه قال أتحاجوني في الله وقد هدان. And then his qawm, his people, argued with him. Now, vernacularly, the word philosophy means using reason. If you look in a Cambridge dictionary, yes, the word philosophy means using intellect and reason to further some kind of case, or something to that effect. And it comes from wise sayings. So if you're asking the question, where in the Quran and Sunnah does it use reason? Then clearly it uses reason in this verse, where Ibrahim was doing his reasoning with his people. He was telling them, he was making an intellectual argument. And in fact, Allah praises him for that. He says, وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَلَى قَوْمِهِ نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَنْ نَشَاءُ. That this is the arguments, these are the arguments which we gave to Abraham against his people, and we raise in ranks whoever we want from our men nasha, whoever we would like to raise in ranks. In other words, if philosophy is defined as use of reason and intellect and arguments to further a case, then certainly this is something which all of the prophets did, not least Abraham in this example. In terms of Ash'arism and Hanbalism and Atheism, so I consider myself an Athari in the sense that I follow Ahmad ibn Hanbal and so on. And this is my personal belief system. And I think it's already been documented, but it's not really relevant to our discussion today.
So Hijab, I want to ask you a question before Hassan speaks here. We've had some very good questions in. So the question is, why can't there be more than one necessary existence that gives rise to dependent things in separate chains of dependence?
The reason why there can't be more than one necessary existence is because a necessary existence, if we recall the definition of it, is something which is uncaused, something which cannot be any other way, and something which is self-sufficient. Yes. Now, everything else depends upon this necessary existence. If we define it in that way, then we will realize that actually there cannot be more than one necessary existence, because the moment you differentiate anything from the necessary existence, it becomes different from it. Remember, a necessary existence is something which cannot be any other way. Now, in my debate, I think people got confused as well in the second debate, because I didn't have as much time as I do now to explain. I said 2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary fact. Now, a necessary fact is different from a necessary existence. A necessary fact, 2 + 2 = 4, is a necessary fact. But in the same way as 2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary fact in the context of mathematics, the necessary existence is necessary in the context of existence. So existence and mathematics are two different categories, if you like. A necessary fact can be, there's many necessary facts. 2 + 2 = 4 is a tautology. So 2 + 2 is equivalent to 4. So in propositional logic, 2 + 2 is 4. It's just another expression of that. Now, if we were to apply this to the necessary existence format, the necessary existence is something which cannot be any other way. There may be many ways of describing the necessary existence, but there's only one way of being the necessary existence. So for example, 2 + 2 is equivalent to 4, which means 2 + 2 is exactly the same as 4. There's no difference between 2 + 2 and 4. 2 + 2 is the same thing. Basically, what you're saying when you say 2 + 2 = 4 is you're saying 4, 4. Or you're saying 2 + 2 = 2 + 2. But you're just saying it in two different ways. Now, the moment you start saying, okay, there can be two necessary existences, but how can there be two necessary existences when the moment you differentiate a necessary existence, it becomes a possible existence by definition? Because a possible existence is something which can be another way, whereas 2 + 2 = 4 is something which cannot be any other way. I'm using this analogously. I'm not using it, I'm saying it's the same. It's analogous. I'm saying you have a necessary fact here, which is 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4. If you say 2 + 2 and then say 5, get rid of the equal sign, then these two things are different. The moment you differentiate something from the necessary existence, so therefore, by virtue of necessity, by definition, a necessary existence, just like a necessary fact, is something which cannot be any other way. Just like a necessary fact cannot be any other way, a necessary existence cannot be another way.
Sorry to cut you off there, Hijab. Because we've got loads of questions, I had to sort of get you to summarize that. For any more details on why the necessary being can only be one, you can get this book, right? or you can get Kalam, Cosmological Arguments. So Hassan, could you please state your question, please?
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Hello. Sir, how I can prove it to atheist easily that God doesn't need anything to create something? How I can prove atheist that God doesn't need anything to create something?
I think when you use the word creation, we have to be very careful in definition. Because really, the words causation and creation, really, they're very similar words. Okay? Now, creation is a little bit more specific. And so I would say causation is a better starting point in discussions. Because causation is defined as something which brings rise to phenomena. Something which brings rise to phenomena. So that's the dictionary definition of causation. If we accept that the necessary existence is uncaused and everything else is as a result of that necessary existence, you could make the argument, if you wanted to make the argument from causation, that therefore everything that is caused, if you believe in causation, comes from the necessary existence. And obviously they will, if they don't believe in causation, which is, in my opinion, quite ridiculous, if they don't, they will try and challenge you on the idea of causation in the first place. But apart from that, I would start with that, because if you have a necessary existence, everything that comes from it is directly linked to it. But in terms of intelligence now, remember, because this argument is in isolation, but we need to add now some of the attributes to God, like intelligence and these things, and that will come later on as a different part of the argument. You can say it's linked to it, but it's not necessary to it.
Sure. Okay, that's a very good answer. Truth Seeker, could you please ask your question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
So
My question is mostly geographical related. So my question is, do you see China, which is the biggest percentage of irreligion, being more susceptible to becoming atheists?
there's, to be fair, from my research, I haven't done too much research on China myself. I think that depending on how you define religious, it's important for us to kind of define atheism and religion. So from my cursory and very weak knowledge on China and its demographics and culture, it seems that spiritual practice is still very much alive in Chinese tradition. But for a better kind of exposition of this, I think you should ask a demographic specialist of the area.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, brother Ahmad. What's your question?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. How are you doing today?
Walaikum salam. Yes. How are you? It's actually a great privilege to actually talk to you.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much. Well, actually, just to cut to the chase, actually, I had a question about, it's not actually a question, it's actually an inquiry, whether you have read, Mr. Suboor and Mr. Hijab, if you have read anything or any response about the multiverse theory, not theory as I understand it, but actually for me, I call it a hypothesis. But if it's just a theory as prescribed by Professor Andre Lind, if you have heard about him, he has 4 videos about explaining the mathematics behind the hypothesis of multiverse. Have you heard anything about a response to that from a Muslim physicist or a thinker, a kind of a intellectual human person that could like explain how the multiverse hypothesis would be ruled out and only the necessary existence can be the answer?
Well, I mean, if someone believes in the multiverse, there's 2 options. Either they believe in a finite number of multiverses or an infinite number of multiverses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If they believe in a finite number of multiverses, the same inquiries that we have now are applicable to the inquiry. So is the finite number of universes, which we believe in a sense, because we believe in 7 heavens. And from the Islamic perspective, that's, 7 heavens is 7 different celestial fields.
Sure.
Because, the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ زَيَّنَّا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيحَ وَجَعَلْنَاهَا رُجُومًا لِلشَّيَاطِينَ, which means that we have created the heaven, we have adorned the sky of the heaven with lamps or stars, and we have made them pelting things for the devils. But so if this is the case, Muslim exegetes say that everything we can see is basically Sama'at dunya. So the idea is, if something is finite, yes, if there's a finite number of universes, then we have the same problem. The same problem is, if what they all depend upon each other, then there will not be existence. In the same way as if dominoes fall upon each other, in our analogy, they will just not exist. Now, having
What about
said
the
that,
infinite case? Yeah.
if they say if it's infinite, then we have the same problem with them. We say, if it's infinite, is it the necessary existence in itself? And if it's the necessary existence in itself, then how can it be susceptible to a subtraction and addition? We have the same problem, because anything that's susceptible to subtraction and addition, okay, is not going to be independent, because anything which is made up of parts is generated. Anything which is made up of parts, which, when I say parts, let me be very specific, I'm talking about something which is susceptible to dissembly. That is, you can break it up like these things, yeah? If there's a multiverse, that must mean there's so many universes, there's more than one. But if it can be broken down, then in that case, it's not necessary. So the infinite universe cannot be necessary, it cannot be necessary, it cannot exist. And the finite one will have to depend on a necessary being for its existence.
Jazakallah khair. And just so that I understand this right, most of your answers that you've been giving so far, Hijab, were actually just based upon the way that you explained your original argument. So a lot of the questions, they arise and they actually already addressed within the original argument and the way that you actually framed it. And I think that's what's so powerful, this contingency argument. Okay, good. So the thinker, I think the thinker came before Wasif, although Wasif came up a bit here. So the thinker, can you please let us know your question? No? Okay. Maybe you're trying to unmute yourself at the moment. Okay, we'll move on to Wasif. Wasif, what's your question? Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. It's actually a very big honor to be with you guys and to ask you questions. So my question was actually related. Thank you. So my question was related to the moral argument. So basically, the thing that we can you be good without God, right? So so if suppose I'm talking to an atheist and this guy is, and I'm trying to explain to him that from a naturalistic perspective that if we are the byproducts of an accident, and finally after evolution, then our moral, the morality we have today is just a byproduct of evolutionary circumstances, which makes it ethics illusory, as Michael Ruse has said. And suppose they bring up Sam Harris and they start saying that, so what? We can use science to justify that morality can be. It basically can, we can use science to justify certain claims, as Sam Harris says that wearing burqa for women in the Middle Eastern countries like Somalia, it's to him it's just not right, and for some reason I don't know what he uses, but so how can we actually tackle that that we cannot actually have an objective morality or an intrinsically valuable morality that can stem from subjective judgments? Or so I think I made it clear. I'm sorry for
good question. Do you want to go first, Hijab?
No, just go for it. I think you've been researching this recently, so
okay. So look, I just want to give an answer which I just to cut to the chase. When atheists actually put up this thing that no, we can still be good without God, I actually just asked them to just do some reading on this, right? Because usually what you find is they're completely out of line with what mainstream secular atheists are saying within academia. So for example, good or bad or evil or these types of value judgments, or like for example in my debate with Cosmic, you know, this whole idea of human rights, all of these things are illusory, all of these things are absolutely baseless. And if you try and construct an objective set of morals based on subjectivity, you're going to have to do a lot of semantic evasion and gymnastics, essentially. And it's only going to take somebody just to poke it a little bit and it just falls down. So my suggestion to everybody, and this is why I had a debate with this atheist who was trying to argue about good existing, and I basically said to him, look, you need to educate yourself on atheism before you have a debate. So I gave him the book An Atheist Guide to Reality by Alex Rosenberg, who is an atheist academic. And also, look, I'll be very frank with you guys. Atheists can be very, I'm not saying they deliberately are deceitful, but there is definitely some amongst them who deliberately confuse things just to make it look like they have the idea of objective good and bad. In reality, good and bad is just an illusion created by our genes to help us survive, and it's absolutely baseless. So like Hijab does in his debates and I do in my debates, if someone's a moral nihilist, then there's no point talking, right? It's like a naked man walking around London pointing at people's hands and telling them to cover their hands because it's unethical not to cover your hands. They're making arbitrary moral judgments while they're basically naked. They've got no basis for those moral judgments. So that's the way I'd basically answer it. Let's go to brother The Thinker. Let's see if The Thinker can unmute himself and we can hear them. We can't hear you. Do you have headphones on or do you have something else on? We can't actually hear what you're saying. Okay, we'll move on to Mahad. Mahad. How are you, Akhi?
Okay, I'll let the disbelievers go first. There's no issue.
No, you could go first. We've got David Wood, the GOAT, and Mr. Logic here. So
okay, can I get a special request from Brother Hijab? Could you say you're finished to all the atheists out there?
Yeah, you're finished.
No, the thing is,
you have to have this one as well.
You're finished.
You know, it's really funny. My cousin, she's studying at university, and of course, that generation is about 10 years younger than us, at least. And at the moment, Hijab has actually become a meme amongst youngsters. He's actually used as a meme, mashallah. Anyway, so Mr. Logic, what's your question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
First thing I would like to say is thank you, brothers, for the work that you've been doing. You've been a huge service to the Ummah, especially Mohammed Hijab, your debate with David Wood as well. So we do appreciate that. However, I think I have some quarrels with the contingency argument. My first question would be, you're against an infinite regress, but how can there be an infinite regress of Allah creating one thing after the other? Because by your logic, our creation would have been preceded by an infinite creations prior, so we would never have got to this moment.
Well, first of all, in Islamic theology, Ibn Taymiyyah had this belief that al-hawadith la awwala laha, where that Allah kept creating pre-eternally, one thing before the other. That's not a belief that's shared by the majority of scholars. So that was an Ibn Taymiyyah belief. It doesn't mean everyone else believed that. But let me answer your question. Let's go with the infinite regress. And the original form of the argument doesn't care about whether there's an infinite regress or not. It's effective whether there is an infinite regress or not. And I'll tell you how. The question is, if there is an infinite regress, what does it depend on? So the same question will be asked, right? So if the infinite regress is either independent or dependent. So if you say it's independent, then you've made the infinite regress into the necessary being.
Yeah.
Now, the necessary being now is a conglomerate of infinite amount of parts which can be dissembled. Then we will say that anything that is been made up of parts which are susceptible to disassembly is generated, and anything which is generated is dependent, and therefore that excludes the idea that the infinite regress can be the necessary being. Therefore, what's required is something outside of the infinite regress in order to grant it, in order for it to be dependent on. And we would say that would have to be the necessary being, because the infinite regress cannot itself be the necessary being. So even if we wanted to grant the actual truth of the infinite regress, which in many ways is absurd, and many have spoken about this, because anything that is susceptible to subtraction and addition is not infinite. And So, but even if you wanted, for the sake of argument, to grant that, then I don't think you'd still have a reasonable contention to the argument.
Excellent. Jazakallah khair for that. I'm so sad because David Wood, the GOAT, has actually disappeared, and I was really looking forward to hearing from him, but he's gone. So we'll just go with Awliya.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullah.
Yes, so basically I want to just quickly tackle one thing from like a sort of traditional Quranic perspective as best as I can, right? So as we know, which is well established in the Quran and the usul of Ahlul Sunnah, that the prophets only came to do one thing, which is to call to the Tawheed of Allah in His uluhiyah, which means, for those who don't know the term, which is to worship Allah alone, right? And to avoid something called Tawheed. So my point here is a question to Hijab, really. If we know from the Quranic narrative that the da'wah of the prophetic methodology of da'wah is purely based upon calling people to worship Allah alone, and as is well established, the three categories of Tawheed, being rububiyyah and worship and the names and attributes of Allah. But the idea of the prophets was to try and get the people to worship Allah alone, which means they had an intrinsic belief in Allah already of His existence, right? So how much of an obligation do we really have to try to convince people about the existence of Allah, as opposed to calling them to worship Allah alone and reminding them of His favors upon them? You see what I'm coming from?
I think that the prophets, alayhim salam, they didn't just focus on uluhiyah, that they focused on rububiyyah as well. And the Quranic discourse, like for example, what I just recited, if you were on the show some time ago, about Ibrahim, and he was talking about the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, what is he trying to establish here? Is he trying to establish rububiyyah, or is he trying to establish uluhiyah? Because if we say that he's trying to establish uluhiyah, well, he hasn't at that point of his inquiry and his discussion, and in fact his debate, because Allah says وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ, that his qawm debated him. He didn't establish rububiyyah with them yet. Okay, so at that point, he was trying to show them that your versions of God are not sufficient from a rububiyyah perspective, not just from an uluhiyah perspective. So I don't think that da'wah is just worship. It's about all three forms of Tawheed. We were calling people to the rububiyyah of Allah, to the uluhiyah of Allah, and to the asma al-husna of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Also, I wanted to just highlight something. Hijab's absolutely correct in what he's saying. I just wanted to add that the prophets of Allah, they also spoke about oppression, and they spoke about stealing, and they spoke about these types of things, which are, of course, great sins, but sins a lot less than shirk, a lot less than associating partners with Allah. And atheism would definitely be a sin which is going to be above stealing, right? So dealing with atheism and tackling it, and prophets also used logic. I think one thing that Hijab did in a very good way is he explained philosophy means different things to different people, where it can actually, in a very simplistic way, it can actually mean thinking about thinking. And from that perspective, many of the arguments that even the Sahaba used, and we have accounts of the Sahaba speaking to mushriks, was using things like, well, who's the greater God, right? Look at these idols. So, using rational concepts. Okay, next question, let's put it to, Torah Waters. Let's give the question to Torah Waters. Hi, Torah.
How are you guys doing today?
I'm well. I like your name, Torah Waters. Are you Jewish?
I'm a Hebrew Israelite.
Nice. Welcome to the show. So what's your question, Torah?
I've been watching Mohammed Hijab's debates. I just finished watching the one with David Wood. And I gotta say, we agree with you guys. Like, there's only one God, but I want to give your Quran a legit chance. Like, I'm gonna go in with an open mind. So I just wanted some advice on which Quran is best for an English speaker.
I mean, something like Quran.com, Sahih International, is free, and you can get access to it straight away. Right? And you can listen to some podcasts of Nauman Ali Khan, who does a great job in explaining some of the key verses and chapters of the Quran. So I would say go to those two things.
Yeah, and also Torah Waters, I just wanted to add that if you could please, in the private chat where you'll see, if you can put your email address and we will get back to you. And we will actually send you either a copy of the Clear Quran for free, or actually we even have now a Quran in Hebrew, right? So depending on, if you want, we can send you both of them for free, inshallah. So wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us. Oh, you've come back. I thought you left there for a second. So definitely leave your email address in the private chat, and we will get back to you. Do you have any follow-up questions to that?
No, first I wanted to say thank you. It means a lot. But no, because Islam is very interesting to me because I like the concept of Tawheed. Like, I strongly reject the Trinity because even within our scrolls, the Torah, it's very like our God is very adamant about worshiping only Him. So I don't understand what these Christians are doing with this whole Jesus stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna leave my email in the chat.
Sure. And also, Torah, I just wanted to ask you briefly, have you heard about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, being mentioned in the Old Testament? Have you heard of this before?
Yes, I've heard all the arguments, Deuteronomy 18, Isaiah, I believe it was 42, where it talks about like Kedar and all that. So yeah, I'm familiar with the arguments.
Okay, Hijab, would you like to add anything to that? Because I think that's...
No, if you're familiar with the arguments, I would just say read the Quran, and just like you said, you got to ask yourself, I would say two things. Read parts of the Quran, okay? If not, the whole thing would be very good. And then read something of the Prophet Muhammad, like a biography of his, from someone like, there's one called The Sealed Nectar, which I recommend. It's called The Sealed Nectar in English. And if we can get him sent something like that as well, we'll send that to you as well, Torah, if you want that as well.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll have a look in our library for a particular...
if not The Sealed Nectar, an equivalent one.
Yeah, but just a little warning on the translations. Firstly, you asked about which the Quran is only one, which is in Arabic. We have different translations. The second thing is, because of the lockdown, you're going to have a bit of a lag in terms of how long it takes to normally get to you. So normally we can deliver within a few days, but because of the lockdown, it may be more than 2 weeks. So just be aware of that.
That, and we can also send them something in PDF form, no?
Yes, we can also do that. But
yes.
Make sure you leave us with your email just before you go.
Thank you so much,
All right. You're welcome. One more question, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, what is your guys' thoughts on the study Quran?
Is that by Mustafa Khattab as well?
No, the study Quran is something different. But what I'll do, Torah, is that's a long discussion because that book came out and there was quite a lot of feedback about it. So we can take that discussion offline.
I'll leave my email real quick, but you guys could like ask other people questions.
Perfect.
Thank
you so much, Torah. And we welcome non-Muslims tuning in and asking questions, and we're very grateful for Torah for joining us and anybody else who's interested in asking questions. And I think something else which is very important to highlight as well is that as Muslims, we reciprocate. So, if somebody is respectful and, is academic, and even if they criticize Islam academically, then we give that person respect. We speak to them, in a loving, respectful, compassionate way. And sometimes because there's been a lot of, even in the comments, you get criticism about Speaker's Corner, that sort of environment is sometimes, you have to, you're under pressure and you sometimes react in an aggressive way sometimes when you're dealing with aggressive people. But generally as Muslims, when we're dealing with genuine non-Muslims like Torah, this is how we are. We're most welcoming, and we'll do everything we can to try and give them Islam in the most compassionate and rational way. Okay, so Brother Akbar, what's your question?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Wa alaikum salam. Yes, we can. How are you, Brother Akbar?
Alhamdulillah. How are you guys?
Alhamdulillah.
I had a question. Forgive me if I'm like mixing up things. I'm a layman in philosophy and that complex study, but I understood the argument of infinite regress that it is impossible for the universe to be eternal because then we would never reach the present. But atheists kind of want to use the same logic on Allah. They say when the universe can't be eternal, then how can Allah be eternal? And I wanted to ask how we can refute them and answer them on that.
Yeah, so I don't think that it's impossible logically for the universe to be eternal. I don't think it's a logical impossibility. I think it's from an Islamic perspective, it's wrong to believe that the universe is kufr, actually, to believe that the universe is eternal. It's disbelief. And that's why Ibn Sina used to believe that the eternality of the universe. But then he was refuted by Abu Hamid al-Ghazali in his book, Tahafut al-Falasifa. So there's nothing logically which dictates that the universe being eternal is so, in my opinion, is so illogical. But even if you believed in an eternal universe, the question is, going back to the multiverse, what is this eternal universe dependent on? So we go back to the question of dependence. What is it dependent on? But obviously, we don't believe in the eternality of the universe for scriptural reasons. Actually, Al-Ghazali has some very powerful and strong arguments for why we should not believe in the eternality of the universe for philosophical reasons as well. So he says, for example, the impossibility of infinity. And he says that if you have an infinite amount of time before the universe, then how could this potentially be the case? And there's all kinds of arguments that he makes on that basis. But even if we grant the premise, is what I'm trying to say, even if we grant the premise that the universe is eternal, pre-eternal, or that there was a pre-eternal set of hawadith la awwala laha, which Ibn Taymiyyah believes in, what is all of that dependent on would be the question. So the eternality of the universe is not something we believe in for scriptural reasons, and also you can say for logical reasons, but less so for logical reasons, because it can be argued logically. But what I would say is that what would it be dependent on? So we still have the problem of infinite chain of dependent things and so on.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for that. I can't pronounce this. Namakazi. Nice name. Assalamu alaikum, Namakazi. What is your question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
My question is to Mr. Muhammad Hijab.
Yes.
Okay, it's on the contingent argument for God.
Yes.
The question is, how can a necessary existence produce something non-necessary in nature? So I think this is called a bootstrapping objection or something.
Yes.
Can you give me like a simple answer to this?
Yeah, because there can't be two necessary existences at the same time for the reasons aforementioned.
Oh.
Yeah, so if you have two necessary existences, what differentiates one from the other? So you have this, there's a problem here. So it's impossible for there to be more than one necessary existence. Because if you have necessary existence and it's defined as something that an existence that cannot be any other way, then you can't have two of those by definition.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Okay, good.
I think the thinker has been waiting for a very long time.
Sorry?
The thinker has been waiting for a very long time.
Oh, the thinker. He's thinking. That's what he's doing. So he doesn't want to ask a question. Joking. How are you doing, thinker? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Alhamdulillah.
What's your question?
Okay, my question for you is, how can atheists say like who created Allah while God in nature cannot be compared to anything? So I'm talking about the nature of God.
The question of who created Allah or who created the one who is uncreated is actually a contradiction. So the question itself is a contradiction in terms. If Allah is defined as the uncreated one, So who created the uncreated one? That's basically what they're asking, which means you're asking who created the uncreated one. That's a contradictory question. You can have a contradictory question. It's a question, and if it's a contradictory question, it's a meaningless one.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I just wanted to add, some academics have criticized new atheism, and in particular Dawkins, the way that they bring up, who made God, as if.
Yeah, I remember Michael Roos. Yeah, I read it. Michael Roos said, and who, he said in one of his articles, about Richard Dawkins, if I remember correctly, and this is an article that was in the Guardian. He said, and Richard Dawkins, he's screaming, who created God, as if he's found something else, like something else. Like this is an interrogation that only a first year, not even a first year undergraduate would. Well, funny enough, he says first year undergraduate, but not even a first year undergraduate would have a thing with. So it's not really it's not serious.
And something else I think which is very important to understand is credible atheists, such as the ones that Hijab studies and Hijab is referenced, like Roos, Massimo, Suboor. They for them this is like it's a question which, the way it's brought up, it's not even academic. So, for example, Massimo, he was asked about who designed the designer. He said, well, the question who designed the designer essentially doesn't refute the argument of design, because if you do ask the question who designed the designer, you're asking a question about the nature of the designer. You're not rejecting the inference from design to designer. So I mean, look, this is why Hijab and myself, we like to study new atheism and refute them using other atheists, because some of these arguments are given way too much weight compared to how light they are. Okay, so let's go with Ummah is one body. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. How are you today? What's
Question.
your question?
Alhamdulillah, I'm all right. So I don't want to digress the topic, but I just wanted to talk about the Ahlul Kalam. I think Mohammed Hijab knows about these people. I wanted to ask him the question, why were the Ahlul Kalam condemned by the Salafus Salih? And if you believe that they were condemned, do you think you're in the same position as the people of Kalam, because they were emphasizing on philosophy and thinking and so forth? I just want your opinion about this. And also Imam Ghazali, do you think he's an authority in Islam when he strayed away from Imam Shafi'i's position on his creed and his aqeed as well? Why do you think he's an authority?
Well, no scholar in Islam is a hujjah. That's the Islamic position. No scholar is a hujjah. The hujjah is what Allah says and what the Quran, obviously what the Quran says and what the Prophet says. This is what a hujjah is. But so in the sense that it's authoritative in so much as you can do and not do as a result of it. The Prophet, Allah says, whatever the Prophet tells you to do, then you can do it, and whatever he tells you to leave, you have to leave. So he's he's an authority in many fields, in the sense that his opinion counts. He's been referenced by everybody in terms of usul and in terms of these things, in terms of fiqh, in terms of philosophy, all those things. Yeah, he's definitely mentioned, but he's not a hujjah, even though he's referred to as Hujjatullah, Hujjatul Islam, but it's different to actually being a hujjah. So I think that's maybe a point of, in terms of Ahl Kalam, there's a difference between Ahl Kalam, that Ja'd ibn Dirham and Jahm ibn Safwan and Al-Marrisi and all of those individuals that started from the time which incorporated Aristotelian logic into the Aqidah of the Muslims. And not just Aristotelian logic, but different kinds of forms, versus those who argue rationally and intellectually. And I think there's a very important fine line between the two. Because if we're arguing that those who argue rationally and intellectually are the same kind of mutakallimun that the Salaf was warning against, then Ibn Taymiyyah would fall in that category without a shadow of a doubt, because he speaks in a very rational, very mantiqi way. In fact, he wrote a book called Dar'u al-Ta'arud bayn al-Aqli wal-Naql, the lack of contradiction between the aql, the intellect, and the naql, which is the nas, which is the text, the textual evidences. So
yes.
Clearly, there's a difference between the two. And when we say philosophy, it's different meaning. And I want you to emphasize this and underline it 1,000 times. Yeah. When we use the word philosophy in our times now, it means something different from what it meant at the time of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and the Salaf. It means something completely different. At that time, they were referring to al-falasifa, who after the 5th or 6th century, like with Ibn Sina, really took off as a separate school of thought. They're a separate school of thought, al-falasifa. So when they were referred to as believing qidam al-alam, they had their set of beliefs that they believed. They were a school of thought. And so someone like Ibn Sina had his own commentarial tradition. But philosophy in the Western world, it means things like liberalism and feminism and things that democracy. And sorry to say, all of the Salafi Mashayikh have commented on those matters. So you find in Saudi Arabia, those who obviously stick to the Salaf and so on, they'll quote or they'll make fatwa on issues to do with democracy being halal and haram, to do with this. But how can you make fatwa on something you don't know? So they have to, for all intents and purposes, study that philosophy. They have to study democracy in order to make a fatwa about it. You have to study liberalism to make a fatwa about it. You have to study those things. And those things are studied by the most hardcore Salafis. So it's not something, because for you to study Aqidah, you have to study philosophy. I mean, if you want, because part of Aqidah studies, is to study the firaq al-dalla, the deviated sects. So if you want to study the deviated sects, for example, the Mu'tazila, let's say, also the Jahmiyyah and all those things, then you have to study their usul. And you have to say, why are they deviated? And that's all philosophical.
So I'm just being reminded that we have very little time left. I want to get through questions. So Hijab, if I could get you to give the answer in 1 minute and make sure that we answer the next 4 questions as quickly as possible. So Call with Wisdom, can you please ask your question?
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Yeah, watching your discussion with Cosmic Skeptic on morality, even with the descriptive model, he said that he doesn't judge. He judges the person, but not the action. To me, that was a bit confusing, because because you judge people for the action. So could you just elaborate on that? That was a bit confusing for me.
Sure. So what I'm planning on doing is more things on this. What's it called? Moral nihilism, and you can go to a video. Actually, I think you're referring to the video I did with him. So we can do that another time, inshallah. I just want to direct the question to Hijab and in relation to what we've been discussing today. So the next question is Al-Krayati. I don't know how to pronounce that. Whoever that is, Assalamu
alaikum. Yes, it's Spanish.
How
Can you hear me, guys?
No hablo español.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, of course. My question is regarding the contingency argument. I can understand that the infinite regress is not possible, but how about circular regress? It may sound like exactly like an infinite regress, but what about if existed, 2 universes existed, and one was the cause of the other, and it was just a cycle that it repeats itself. So if there's a big bang, then a big crunch, then a big bang, then a big crunch, in a circular motion, but not a infinite linear motion.
Yeah, no problem. Even if it's one of the two, either of the two, is the same thing would have to be the case, which is if it's circular, or if it is a crunch and an expansion and a crunch and expansion, what is this whole system dependent on? It would have to be dependent on something. Okay, either it's dependent on itself or it's dependent on something else. Now, as we've said, the eternality of the universe, say there's been a crunch and an expansion and a crunch infinitely regressively backwards, for the sake of argument. I mean, although we reject it on logical grounds, but let's say we accept it for the sake of argument. If we accept it for the sake of argument, we're asking, what is this eternal cycle of expansion and crunch and expansion dependent on? Is it dependent on itself? Well, if it's dependent on itself, then it's the necessary being. And if it's the necessary being, then we have all the problems. A universe with it being a necessary being, it's made up of different parts, which are susceptible to dissembly and so on. So then, if it's made up of different parts which are susceptible to dissembly, which means to say, then it cannot be independent, because anything which is made up of parts is generated, and everything which is generated is dependent. So you have the same problems. It doesn't. The crunch and expansion model doesn't do anything for the. And this is the strength of the theory. It kind of avoids all of the argument here. That's why it's uncrackable, because you can bring anything you want, but the same problems will arise. Which is why people, with all due respect to them, don't want to engage with this argument, because what you're going to say, whatever you give me, there's going to be an answer. And it's not because I'm clever or this or that. It's simply because this argument is simply uncrackable.
Yeah. So Jazakallah khair. Sorry for cutting off. I'm wary about time. We had a skeptic. We had Mr. Skeptical, who we were going to give the mic to next, but who actually disappeared for some reason. So Mr. Skeptical, if you're watching, can you please come back and we will give you priority. Next question, Fawad. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Just a quick one. It's kind of a suggestion. Just now, Brother Hijab mentioned about a book, Sealed Nectar. So these kind of points you guys mentioned within this chat, or in the park as well. So if we can create a Google Drive where we have some sections, some good books to read, not only for non-Muslim, for Muslim who are wanted to have more understanding of the religion and more understanding on the Prophet life.
So I would say, I would answer that question. I would give you some now. Why not now? I mean, for the Google thing is a bit difficult. I mean, I'll just give you some titles which I recommend. I mean, for a beginner, for someone who's interested in Islam, or someone who's Muslim and wants to read some books. So obviously we have The Divine Reality from Hamza Zotsis. Yeah, it's a very good book. I recommend it. Which kind of gives you arguments for God's existence. You've got my book called Kalam, Cosmological Arguments, which he doesn't have a copy of, but it's another one. So these are for God's existence, arguments for God's existence. In terms of what other books would we recommend? So I'd recommend The Sealed Nectar, or something like it for the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'd recommend.
There's also, I think, one of a really underrated book is The Messenger by Tariq Ramadan. I know. Yeah, that is a really underrated book. I mean, I would say it's better than The Sealed Nectar, definitely. Sealed Nectar is good, but The Messenger is amazing.
But the thing is with The Sealed Nectar, it's written by, like, with all due respect to Tariq Ramadan, he's not on the same level of hadith, like hadith as so. Obviously, with seerah, you want to have something which is to the highest level possible reliable, and seerah is difficult. So that's why I would say The Sealed Nectar. And it's a good read as well in English. The translation is actually quite good. So I would also recommend, there's a nice little book called The Spiritual Cure, which is a red book, and it's like Surah Al-Fatiha. It's kind of like explanations of Surah Al-Fatiha or something like that. I'd recommend a nice little book called The Inner Dimensions of Prayer, which is in English, by Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. It's a very beautiful little sweet read, and it will help you get that khushu'ah in the prayer, which we all need to do, especially in Ramadan and so on, after Ramadan. It's called The Inner Dimensions of Prayer. It's a very nice little book. I also recommend the book, obviously, you want something like Tafsir ibn Kathir in English, so that you can see what some authorities, now they're abridged versions are good as well. I would recommend a book like this. I mean, don't ask me why I have it in my car, but a book like this, which is Bulugh al-Maram, which is for hadith, something nice for fiqh type thing, just to have in your house. Riyadh al-Salihin, I would recommend this as well, which is for good book for hadith. I would recommend something on fiqh. So if you're a Hanafi and you're watching, so you'll know what the school says. Hanbali school, something like Umdat al-Fiqh or something to start you off.
We need to.
There's more. We can maybe do a whole video on this one day.
We need to wrap up because of time. So let's basically take. I'm not sure how we're going to be able to take all three questions. I'm asking the admin, can we take all three? But don't add any more people, please, because we're going to be running out of time. So Hijab, if you could please answer the question in less than a minute, if possible. So Hasib, what's your question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Sir, I'm from Pakistan. I was born as a Muslim. But you know, we as a children we ask question which people usually don't answer. You know, and I thank you for the Speaker's Corner for the videos because now I have some meaning in my prostration in the sujood. So I get all the argument about the contingency, infinity arguments. But I want to ask Suboor for the evolution matter because I don't get it. I mean, we are in the reality in this world, and evolution must be a something. I mean, you can't deny the evolution. And Quran said that we created you, and I don't get it. How we? I mean, how Islam extend the evolution argument? I don't get it.
So if you go to
So can you please explain the?
Yeah. So if you go to Darwinian delusions, I go live pretty much every single day, and I've addressed this question many, many times. And the next time I'm going to be live is most likely tonight or tomorrow. And you can ask this question again, and I'll address it there. Okay, Brother Umar, what's your question?
First of all, love you all for the sake of Allah. My question is, how do we understand Allah properly when most of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala is about bila kaif? Even some Christians have used the bila kaif argument to justify Trinity. Please explain. Thank you.
So bila kaif is not to say we don't know who he. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so kaif is how. Yeah, in Arabic, that's what I say. Kaif haluk, kaif haluka. You know, how are you doing? You know, so kaif is howness, right? The howness of Allah. Howness is differentiated from whatness and who-ness. Okay, if you can say that, mahiyya, inniya, essence, and so on. So with the Trinity matter, it's not a matter of howness; it's a matter of who-ness, right? Because who is God? It's not about how is God. It's about who is God in the first place. You know, I mean, that's the question is way more severe. The problem with the Trinity is we can't even identify who God is. You know, or the identification of who God is contradictory within itself when you consider all three persons of the Trinity. So it's about who. How is different. There's many things we don't understand how. And the only thing you can produce is an argument from incredulity or ignorance that says, okay, well, just because we don't know, it's not true. But we don't know many things. So it's different. We're not saying they're saying the 3 in 1 and 1 in 3 is a mystery. We're saying no, it's not a mystery, it's a contradiction.
Absolutely. So thank you for that question. I just want to remind everybody that we're coming to the end, but remember SC Dawah, this channel, and the fact that it gives people like myself and Hijab and other du'at across the world platform. It runs.
So they have a Patreon. Do they have a Patreon?
They have a Patreon, yes, and that is what we want you guys to do. In the description, you can go to the SC Dawah Patreon. Now, what is the Patreon? That's basically a lifeline for SC Dawah to continue. And I just want to remind everybody of something, right? If you go to major atheist channels, they have massive Patreons. They have massive Patreons. Sure. And the Patreons that, for example, that a Muslim channel will have would be trivial. And it's actually really shocking that someone like Aaron Ra or somebody else from the atheist community, they're fully funded and they have a very big Patreon when the Muslim channels are basically asking for peanuts in comparison to that. And what they're asking for is simply to be able to give dawah, not to buy a Bentley or do anything else like this, right? So make sure everybody watching, you give something, even if it's $1 or £1 per month. In fact, I'm a Patreon to China Uncensored, which is a completely random channel. So it doesn't cost you anything. It's just $1, you know, or £1 or whatever. It's peanuts. It's literally nothing.
And since we're talking about Patreons, I wanted to thank some of my Patreons as well for supporting me, because there's some people that do that, and I haven't had the chance to actually thank them in any way, shape, or form. So if you're watching, thank you. I'm sorry I haven't been active on Patreon.
Yeah, at the same time, I would say for Hijab or for SC Dawah, this is literally peanuts compared to what others are asking for, but you have to get involved. It's the month of Ramadan. Allah loves the deeds which are consistent, even if they're small. Okay, the next question we'll give to Brother Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, barakallahu feekum. I appreciate all the work you guys have been doing. Jazakumullah khair. My question is, in terms of the Kalam cosmological argument, one of the first premise being that everything that began to exist has a cause. So how would you respond to somebody who says that before the existence of time and space, there was no causes and effects didn't come in sequence, so there could have been an effect that didn't need a cause?
That's why I don't make the Kalam, because that particular type of Kalam cosmological argument by itself. I usually make this argument with the contingency argument, which we've just gone through today. Because the reason why I do that, it's like when I'm not really a good chess player, but when you're playing chess, you need kind of like two pieces near the queen. I feel like by itself, it's limited, the Kalam, because that particular type of Kalam cosmological argument. So I think that when you put the contingency argument with it, then the arguments about causation all fly out the window.
Yep.
And all of the questions of causation fly out the window. Because you can make the contingency argument without reference to causation at all.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for that. So Brother Mohammed, Assalamu alaikum. What's your question?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Alaikum salam. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, my question is about the contingency argument. If we're looking at it from, say, an authority approach to creed, wouldn't the contingency argument or could it have issues with, say, affirming some of God's attributes, such as, for example, if we say God had two hands, for example, would that indicate plurality and then no longer make God the necessary being?
That's a very good question, and the answer is no. This is a typical misconception of some of the commentators, some of the I'm not going to mention their name, but who I'm actually going to respond to formally today on SoundCloud. I'm sure you might kind of know who I'm talking about. It's been back and forth between me and them. And I'm going to have a full-length refutation. If you go on my Twitter account, then I'll link you in to my particular refutation, or response to that question in detail. I've got a 30-minute response, which I actually recorded today to that particular question. So if you want to listen to it, then you can listen to it. I've recorded the response. It's going to be on SoundCloud, and I'm going to put it on Twitter.
Absolutely. So today we were covering the Uncrackable, or was it Uncrackable argument from contingency, and you covered it well. And there's questions that came, and I noticed most of the questions, they were actually already answered within the way that you actually structured the argument.
Exactly.
So,
which is the beautiful thing about this argument. I know it's long-winded compared to the cosmological one, but it's got less refutation.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I didn't hear any refutation of this argument when we were in the debate in Oxford. And to be fair, also, I've never really heard any argument against this that you could even consider. That there's some arguments you consider a good contention, then you give it a reply. But I haven't actually seen even a good contention yet of contingency. I don't know if you have, but I've not.
Yeah, no. The only ones which relate to infinity, I think that's where it becomes a little bit, okay, you have to think about it, but definitely there's nothing there. There's nothing there you can really refute.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just going to end. Jazakallah khair for everybody watching SC Dawah Live. Make sure you go to Patreon and you support this channel, and also Mohammed Hijab has his Patreon as well. And one last message which I want Hijab to give everybody in the last, potentially maybe the last fast tomorrow, something for all of us to think about.
I think we have to think about the night prayer, or we have to think about what we've done. You know, the Quran says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. We have prescribed upon you the fast like we have those before you, so that you may be God conscious. So we have to, and this is an advice to myself, see what we've been able to achieve of positive habits and try and implement those after Ramadan, inshallah.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for joining us on SC Dawah, and may Allah bless all of you and bless the last couple of hours, potentially day of Ramadan that we have left. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.